Williamson, writer and photographer, and they wrote a book called Journey to Nowhere. It was a beautiful book that kind of chronicled the decline of the steel industry, the impact on the Rust Belt and on the whole group of people that kind of helped build the country and then got marginalized. These guys actually traveled by rail across the country, and this was something I wrote for them. This is called The New Timer.
This is Dale Maharidge. That was Bruce Springsteen's introduction to a New Timer in one of his shows that came after his Ghost of Tom Joad tour. That song, The New Timer, it's a little bit about Michael S. Williamson and me, and a lot about the people we documented. I'm going to tell that story here and how we met Bruce for the first time back in 1995. Back in the 1980s, Michael Williamson and I produced 3 books. The first one, called Journey to Nowhere, we rode the rails with the jobless who were then out of work because of the recession then raging. We worked on that for 3 years. Our second book was on old poverty. We went to Alabama and documented whatever happened to cotton sharecroppers who were the poorest of the poor in the Great Depression. Finally, our last book in that 1980s trilogy was The Last Great American Hobo, about the last stand of a Great Depression hobo. His name was Blackie. That was a very personal story. We got to know a lot of the neighbors, including Jeremy, a homeless boy living with his father and brothers in the next camp. The 1980s became the 1990s. In 1990, the police forced Blackie to move on. He vanished. These are some of Michael's final photos on the beach below Blackie's camp. We'd been with the Sacramento Bee newspaper for a lot of years. We quit that year. Michael and I became estranged. The 1980s were really, really hard on us. We didn't talk much or see each other for a few years. And then in 1995, Michael won the prestigious award, Newspaper Photographer of the Year. He was now at the Washington Post. Part of the award was a 7-city tour. Oddly, or wonderfully, it ended in Sacramento. I was teaching 2 hours away at Stanford University. I told Michael we had to meet up and deal with some of the demons from the 1980s. We ended up in the hobo jungle on the bank of the Sacramento River, Blackie's camp. Of course, Blackie was gone, the camp was gone. We had a 6-pack of beer, and we sat there and talked about the 1980s, and especially our first book, The Hobo Project. He just found out that his wife, Michelle, was pregnant with their first daughter, Sophia, who would later be followed by Valerie. Michael was going to remain in California a week to create a photographic diary for his unborn child of the places where he grew up in poverty. I went back to Stanford. The next morning, there was a message on my phone machine. Bruce Springsteen wants to meet you, it said. I thought, Michael, you're pulling a joke. But it was true. Bruce wanted to meet us at Neil Young's bridge benefit in a few days. And so I called Michael. When I got him to believe me, he came down to Stanford, and we went over to the Shoreline Amphitheater. We got our backstage pass. Bruce's managers, Barbara Carr and John Landau, sent us out in the audience to listen to a couple of Bruce's songs from the new album. We came backstage. Neil Young was slapping Bruce in the back. Bruce was coming off stage. Bruce said, "Get in here." Went into his dressing room, and the first thing I asked Bruce was, "How the fuck did you hear about our book?" And he said, "I bought it when it came out. Want some whiskey? Beer?" So we had some whiskey. Bruce said, "Your book should be back in print." And I said, "Bruce, would you be willing to write an introduction?" And he said, "Sure." And we did a very fast and furious trip around the country to update it. This is where the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Works had been. I'm holding the book, and Michael's photographing the same scene with the mill gone. All the steel mills that closed, 60,000 lost jobs in Youngstown, and the new industry in town, 4 prisons. Prison guards were the job of the future. Joe Marshall Jr. was a security guard, part-time. He had 3 part-time jobs. He had worked in the Ohio Works, a mill that inspired one of Bruce's other songs, Youngstown. I'm going to tell about that in part 2 of this 1995 show. We ended up in Houston on Thanksgiving Day. This is Thanksgiving in Houston in the hobo jungle. But as he drove across the open road and headed west, Michael and I talked about Bruce's songs. Bruce actually wanted to know what we thought of his songs. He'd sent us a CD, and we listened to it for the first time in Houston. We called him at home Thanksgiving Day and told him how we pretty much were bawling like babies when we heard both songs. Very personal, very incredibly accurate songs that captured so much of our book. It was based partly, as I say, on us and some of the hobos and homeless we met in the 1980s, and especially No Thumbs, Alabama Tom, Thomas Jefferson Glenn, channeled in Bruce's song as Frank, the old hobo. And this is how Bruce's song begins. No Thumbs, who's Frank in this song, he's the guy who taught me how to ride the rails, the first hobo I met. I've got terrible audio of the new Timer. I just played a little bit of it to give you an idea. You should listen to the real version of Bruce's song on the Ghost of Tom Joad anyway. I'm only going to play one more cut from it. All the photos in this show were taken by Michael, a few by me, but the ones that follow are specific ones that inspired Bruce. If you're into his music, I hope seeing these pictures in this context gives a little more deeper meaning to his song. The song goes through an unnamed character, the new Timer. One of the unnamed characters is Sam. We write about him in our new book, Someplace Like America. He rode across America seeking the dream of a job, and we traveled with him. These are a few pictures of him and us. Bruce sings, "I hoed sugar beets outside of Firebaugh." That actually happened the year before we met Sam. This is a picture by Michael of men hoeing sugar beets outside of Firebaugh. It's a crew that Michael and I had worked on a few days earlier. We went back and got some pictures. The camp operators were not happy with us. And this is what you get paid for a day's work. James Brown, a fellow we'd worked farm labor with, they charged him $20.50 to sleep in a barn. And you want to argue? The farm operators would have a .38 pistol on the table when they did payday. You don't argue. So Bruce sings, "They bunked us in a barn just like animals." Michael and I slept in some of those barns. These are some of the pictures where we worked and slept and the men we met. And then Bruce sings what happens to Frank. The new Timer and Frank had just split up. The new Timer never sees Frank again, except for one night when he blows by on a grainer, shouted my name and disappeared in the rain and wind, Bruce sings. In real life, that's how I last saw No Thumbs. He blew by us, we waved, and he was gone. And here's Bruce's lyrics. "They found him shot dead outside of Stockton, his body lying on a muddy hill. Nothing taken, nothing stolen. Somebody killing just to kill." So after the death of Frank, the new Timer travels on in Bruce's song. He's rolling through the plains of Texas. He spots a small trackside house. He sees a woman cooking and a child, and he wonders if his son misses him. Does he wonder where I am? The new Timer ends up in the song in Sacramento, and he picks his campsite. I'm going to end this show with another piece of Bruce's song, and in it Bruce channels a lot of my rage about what happened out there on the rails.